Hello and welcome to the continuation of our couch example for the PTS CAD course. Last time we left off with the completion of our first 3D object. We created it based off of a sketch that we made. And so if you don't remember, I can quickly show you that sketch. I'm going to hide a body. I'm going to show us our original sketch. And we can see we dimensioned it. We talked about the line tool to create individual lines that can be snapped together. We talked about the sketch dimension tool that allows us to enforce particular sizes on lines, on distances between vertices, and so on. We talked about a few different constraints. We talked about the horizontal constraint, which forces a line to be horizontal or vertical, for if it's a vertical line. We talked about the coincident constraint, which forces two individual vertices to be together in the same location. We can also force a vertex to be on a line. We haven't done that yet, but we might see that in the near future. We also talked about the perpendicular constraint that was given to us to make two lines 90 degrees from one another. And those are the only ones we've seen so far, but we'll continue on and potentially see some more as we go. So let's go back to where we were. We were done with that first sketch. We produced a 3D body from it, and now we want to move on and do the next phase. I'm going to show us our diagram again, and we can see we've made the overall layout shape of this thing. The next thing I want to do is kind of make these walls appear, right? Because if we look at our object, if I do a side view, there should be a wall here, right? The flat square part. That's not all the way up, but a portion of it. I could also do maybe the cut of the shoulders, but I'm going to do those afterwards. I'm going to instead do the walls. And so let's go ahead and try doing that and go from there. So let's go back to our sketch. Now, again, the choice is, well, when we make a sketch, by default, it lets us choose which plane we're going to draw on. So if I click Create Sketch, the button, it gives us these options. I don't necessarily want to pick one of these because what I want to do is I want to draw on a part of the existing object. I don't want to make a separate object, a loose one. I want to make one that's connected directly to it. So instead of choosing one of these, I'm going to hit Escape. I'm not going to create a new sketch like that. Instead, I'm going to rotate around and look at the back face of my sketch, which is this big flat wall, right? The angled wall is on the other side. This is the side. I'm going to click it once so it turns blue. And now when I choose the Create Sketch button, instead of asking me which plane to draw on, it's going to make the assumption that because this face is selected, that I must want to draw my sketch directly on this face. And that's actually true. I want to be able to draw on the back of this object. So sketches are not just on planes, but also on faces. If it's a flat surface, we can draw on it. So I'm going to click the Create Sketch button, and we'll see immediately it rotates the view and puts us a grid there and on the back. And I'm going to show you temporarily that this is actually what we're drawing on, because if I rotate my camera slowly, you'll notice that grid is not floating in nowhere. It's actually kind of slapped onto the back of this thing. So I'm drawing on the back face, and I can go back to a flat view, but I am drawing on the back face of this shape, on this rectangle essentially. So now, if we were, we can't see it, but we were on the back side, we're going to draw. What I want to do is I want to produce these rectangles. And if I make this one rectangle flat, I could stretch it forward and make these walls. So the question is, what is the dimension of this rectangle? And if we look at this side, I believe we do have it. It is 7 millimeters wide from edge to edge and 16.7 millimeters tall. So our goal is to make a rectangle that is like that on this back face. And where we place it is going to change. But what we're going to do is we're just going to make the rectangle. Again, one strategy often is to just make the rough shape and then dimension it by giving it certain lengths and then placing it. Those are kind of the three steps I'm going to take. Draw the shape, give it dimensions, place it correctly. So I could use the line tool to make a rectangle because a rectangle is essentially 4 lines. But I can also use a rectangle tool because rectangles are such common shapes that they have what's called by default a 2-point rectangle. We click once for the top left, we click a second time for the bottom right, and that is our rectangle, and then we can dimension it afterwards. If I go to the Create menu, there are other forms of rectangles. There's a 3-point rectangle and a center point. The end goal of all of them is to make a rectangle. So it does not really matter which one you want. The default is the 2-point. So I'm going to select it, or I can click the button, or R on the keyboard. Any of those 3 options is acceptable. So I'm going to click it. Again, we know the tool is on because if you look at the cursor, we have the white cursor, we have a crosshair, and we have a little square that looks like it. So it says place the first corner. Again, I'm not trying to make it exactly where it belongs. I'm just going to make a rough rectangle. So I'm going to click once, and notice it kind of gives me the 2 dimensions, and I can click twice. And there it is. Notice by default, it shows us some constraints, vertical constraints, horizontal constraints, right? Because it couldn't be a rectangle if there weren't horizontal lines and vertical lines, two parallel sets, right? If they were angled, then we might have a parallelogram, but not a rectangle. So, or I guess a rectangle is a parallelogram, but it would be one very sub-specific one. So I'm going to hit escape so I can get rid of this tool. So now I'm back to my regular cursor. Notice one thing, we haven't dimensioned it yet. We're still in the sketch, but when I hover over different areas that are closed, it highlights them. These are called features. As we make shapes, things that are considered distinct now are considered features of our object. So this is a feature, just this area right here. This outer area, not including the middle, is a feature. Right? And so originally we had one feature, the entire back wall. Now we have two features, and we're going to kind of slowly move them and adjust them as we need to. And then eventually we can take those features and either cut them out or extrude them to be 3D, or I'll do all sorts of different things. So let's dimension our rectangle. Again, the tool is in the Create menu at the very bottom, or the D keyboard shortcut. There's my cursor. Our top dimension should be 7. I was pretty close. That was 7.05. So let's put 7 millimeters. And of course, recognize that I do not need to dimension the bottom one, because if it is a rectangle, these must be the same length. So if I try to click this one and do it, it's going to complain. It says, look, hey, there's already a dimension known even though you didn't give it to us. And it is going to be 7 millimeters. So I'm going to hit cancel so it doesn't happen. And there's our error on the bottom right that we over-constrained or tried to. Now the next one, we can pick the left or the right side. So I'm going to pick the right side. And this one, I wasn't too close. Instead of being 10, it should be, I'll double click on it. I can put 16.7 millimeters. There it is. And that's how long it is. And those are the two dimensions that we discovered from here. 7 wide, 16.7 tall. And if you're not sure, just to make sure, I'm going to rotate my view. Notice that this is the top, so the rectangle is actually touching the bottom wall, not the top. So I have to make sure. And the idea is that this thing should go somewhere down here. This corner should be close to this corner. Right? That's the goal that we have to have. Now I could manually, now that I got rid of my dimension tool, I could actually drag by clicking on the line and move the rectangle freely off the back or on the back or anywhere in this vicinity. Now I could do this and try to eyeball it and be close. And if I zoom in, the reality is I'm not close, and I can zoom in a lot and notice, woof, that's getting pretty far. And even though from here it looks great, if I back up, it's a lie. We don't want to trust our eyes. We want to trust the dimensions instead. So what we're going to do is I'm going to move this a little bit so it's easier to see. So there we are. We can instead use a constraint. And so I mentioned the coincident constraint is fantastic for forcing one vertex to be in the exact same position as another vertex. And so what I'm trying to say is I want this corner to be exactly at this corner. And notice when I hover over those corners, the two vertices appear. So let's select the coincident constraint. Now what I'm going to mention is I know it happens sometimes. So notice if I click on this line, it's dark blue, it's selected, and if I choose one of these constraints, it could mess it up. So what I tend to do is hit escape a few times so that nothing is selected just in case, or click away into the white empty space so that we don't accidentally have something selected that we don't want to have selected. So now that nothing's selected, I'm going to choose a coincident constraint, and notice the mouse does change, so now I know. And then I'm going to choose the two things that I want to be coincident. In this case, two vertices. It does not matter the order. What's going to happen is, at least in this situation, the order does not matter. Typically, it's going to say the first point is going to move to the second point, or the second point is going to move to the first. In this situation, this rectangle cannot move because it's tied to the origin. So when we coincident them, this one's going to jump down to the bottom, which is what we want. So I'm going to select this corner. There's one. And notice how it stays there and it's like a blue. The second one, bam, it jumps. So some things to note. I'm gonna hit escape to get rid of the tool, just in case I don't want to mess anything up. And notice this is all black, no more blue lines, because it is fully constrained. There's nothing else I can do to this shape to adjust it. And now again, we still have two features, but now they're actually what I wanted. One feature is this little square here, and then the rest. Right, that's the idea. And again, I can try to drag this. The dimensions limit the size, and I can't move it because these are connected. Again, notice there are three coincident constraints. One is the original vertex to the origin. Another one is the bottom corner of this rectangle to the origin. And the last one is the two lines that are connected to each other by coincidence. So all of those are applied here. And I could get rid of any one of them potentially, but I'm not going to do that. And so there is our shape, 16.7 by 7. We have two walls, So let's do another one. We've basically done this one and this the left side. Let's go to the right side on the same thing on the back and do that. So let's make another rectangle. So I'm going to choose the rectangle button. I'm just going to make a rough rectangle. It doesn't got to be perfect. And then I'm going to switch to the dimension tool. So the create menu or the D keyboard shortcut. This one should be 7 millimeters, and there it is. The height should be 16.7, just like the other one. There it is. And again, I was pretty close to the position, so I'm going to hit escape to get rid of this tool. I'm going to coincident this bottom right vertex with this bottom right vertex. So again, just to make it easier, I'm going to drag this so it's a little bit higher up. I'm going to hit escape so that nothing is selected. I'm going to go to the constraints menu. The second option is coincident. I click it. Bottom right vertex. Bottom right vertex. They jump. No more blue lines. I think we are where we need to be. I'm going to hit escape to get rid of this tool one more time. And that's it. So now I have 3 features. 1 feature, 2 features, and 3 features. Again, feature is just the terminology for the separation of sections of your shapes. And so now I'm happy with this sketch. So I'm going to click the Finish Sketch button. And there it is. And again, notice the features still exist. Now this is still one solid object. If I look at the body, there's still one body. But on this body, the back has individual features. So that's 3 different features. Now, if we just counted features in total, we could say 1 feature for that one, 2 features, 3 features. The top would be a 4th feature, a 5th feature, a 6th feature, a 7th feature, and the last one would be the bottom, 8 features. Right? I'm just pointing out that the reality is that to make this whole shape, there are 8 features. We're not necessarily interested in all of them, but the idea is that that's what is happening, distinct points or sections of our body. So now that we've done this, let me go back to my home view. This is not bad. You can still see the sketches behind the thing. I'm going to rotate back to the other side. And I'm going to extrude, but instead of going in this direction, I want to go inward so that hopefully they'll poke out and become a wall. And the goal is to end up looking like these walls sticking out. So I'm going to click on the first one. I know I've selected a feature because it highlights blue. And you may see red lines, you may not. That depends on how your system is set up. To hold 2 features at the same time, because I want to make both walls at once instead of having to do each one individually, I'm going to hold the Control or Shift key, either one, and then click on the second one. Notice now both are blue because I held down the Shift button. And now with both of these features selected, I can go to the Extrude button. Again, it is the second option. E is the keyboard shortcut, or I can go into the menu and find Extrude. Notice the arrow by default is pointing away, so if I drag this way, it becomes walls going that direction, but that's not what I want. And so I'm going to go the other direction. Hopefully we'll see something. But now there's one problem. It's giving us a preview of what's going to happen. It actually by default says, well, if you have a feature and you drag it into a solid, meaning the shape that we're in, the big trapezoid, then you must want to scoop out or cut out the red portion from that and break away or destroy what was there. And that might be the case for some things. In fact, that's what's going to probably happen for these 2 parts, these shoulders that are missing. But for the walls, we don't want to eliminate them. We want to merge them into one object. And so where it says operation, notice now instead of saying new body, it says cut. The implication is I'm going to cut out the red area from the gray area. And I don't want that. Instead, I want to join them. And so if we choose the operation menu, the first section is join. And as soon as I do this, notice now it's all gray. You see one smooth wall. And of course, I can still play around with these. So notice I could change and I can make them longer or shorter. And if I go that way, notice no matter what now, there's no cut. So it can blend either direction. And the question is, how far should I go, right? And this actually looks about right. But now just to confirm with our diagram, this suggests 26 millimeters. There's no obvious dimension here, but the fact is, this bottom line was from wall to edge, and the wall went up to that edge. So it should be 26. If the wall starts back here, you may not see it in this area, but as it comes out, it shows up. But the sum length is 26 millimeters. So I could be happy with this, and I could click OK, and that would be the 2 walls. But I do want to point out, one limitation in doing it this way is if I were to resize my entire couch, make the whole thing bigger, maybe instead of being 26 tall and 26 wide or long, it was 50 millimeters, then these walls would still stay 26 millimeters, and then they might not look correct. They might not merge out as much as we want. And so manually choosing an amount when our goal is to make it always go to the edge is not necessarily a good choice. Instead, in our direction, I'm sorry, not in our direction, in our extent option, this is one that we didn't touch last time for extrude, we have 3 options. We have to object and all. I'm going to suggest all as the best choice. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm confusing. This is for a different part. So, no, in this case, distance is a reasonable choice, though it is kind of limited. If we put to object, I really can't choose. I could do that vertex, and that's also an option. But still, for now, I apologize. We're going to stick with distance, and we'll keep negative 26. So 26 millimeters that way. And it is a join. That's the key. And when I click OK, it'll hide the sketch that had those. And if I look at my sketch folder, notice both are invisible, the original and the one we just made with the 2 squares. They're no longer visible. But our extrusion brought out the 2 walls. So if I go to the home view, we're slowly but surely coming along to this view. We have these 2 walls out, right? You can see this triangle is a result of this, and there it is, right? We can see that as a feature as appeared. Good. So let's try the next thing, which will be cutting out the shoulders. And the shoulders will be very much like how we did the walls. We will draw yet another sketch on the back side. We will make 2 rectangles, the correct dimensions, and we'll put them in the corners. The difference will be when we extrude, instead of doing a join, we will stick with a cut. And the result is that that red area will be scooped out. So let's try that. I'm going to click on the back wall. It is highlighted blue. I'm going to choose the Create Sketch button. And there I am. And now let's make a rectangle. So I'm going to use R on the keyboard, and there it is. I'm just going to make a rough rectangle. It doesn't got to be perfect. There's one. I'm going to use D on the keyboard to dimension. So now I'm on this tool. How wide and how tall is this rectangle? So there's no dimensions on this side, so here's what we have to rely on. So from this edge to the inner cut is 11, so that's the width. And the height was, right here, 5. So 5 by 11. So let's do that. The height, I'm going to put 5. The width, I'm going to put 11, so it's a little bit longer. There it is. And then now I'm going to hit Escape on my keyboard, and I'm going to use the coincident constraint yet again to force this top corner to be in that top corner. Because again, the idea is that if we flush it to the corner and we scoop it out, the result is that all of this is cut out. So I'm going to click away, hit Escape, make sure nothing else is selected. Coincident constraint from the menu. Top left vertex, they are snapped together. Now I'm going to pause here momentarily. I'm going to hit Escape. I'm not going to recreate a second rectangle. I did it on purpose previously just to show you and get comfortable with using those tools. But there is yet another tool. If we're going to use symmetry, we might as well take advantage of it. And so symmetry is going to allow us to mirror this rectangle across to the other side in the exact positioning, but just opposite. And we're going to mirror along an axis that's straight down. And so in order to do that, there is a mirror button, but before we do it, we must create a line that represents what we're going to mirror on, the axis that we're going to mirror on. Unfortunately, we can't use the green line. It's not really there. It's only for reference. And so we're going to make a line down the middle, but one of the things that I want to point out is that line is not actually meant to help us or change the features. Instead, it's purely for a reference. So we're going to make what is called a construction line. A construction line is a line, and construction shapes are also a thing, but construction lines, generally speaking, are lines that, while they exist in our sketch, and while they may be referenced by constraints and dimensions and so on, they have no impact on features. So I'm going to show you quickly what it looks like without construction and with construction. So we're going to choose the line tool, and I'm going to move along the top edge until I get to the center. How do I know this is the center or midpoint? When I hover over it, you see a little triangle to the top left of my cursor that says midpoint. So this horizontal line, the midpoint is right here. And that's about right if you think about it, because we chose symmetry down the origin, and so that green line is the origin. So I would hope that the midpoint would also be on the origin. I'm going to click all the way down and go straight to the center point down here, the origin, click. And there's a black line. I'm going to hit Escape just to show you. If I count features on this back wall, suddenly there are 1, 2, and 3. The problem is I don't want this to be separated into 2 features. Instead, I want this to be one giant feature and then this to be a second feature. So this line is not a construction line. To make it a construction line, we're going to click on it once, so it's blue. And then our sketch palette on the right, that first little option says construction, we're going to click on it, and it's going to become a dotted line. And now if I click away, notice what happens. One feature, two features. That split it's visually there because of the dotted line, but it's not really there in terms of the sketch. And so it's helpful for reference. It's going to be good for our mirroring, right, our symmetry, but it's not going to have an impact on features. And this is kind of an optional thing that we can use, and it often is helpful to have extra data that doesn't really change anything. It's just there for our purposes, small purposes in terms of using tools or reference or whatever it may be. So now, the mirror tool. In order to mirror, we need two things. The things that we want to mirror, in this case, this rectangle, and the axis or a line on which we want to mirror across. Right, so the goal is if we mirror across this vertical line, we should have a horizontal mimicry on the opposite side. How do we do this? In the Create menu near the top, this 5th button, looks like two triangles, a black one and a blue one, is the mirror tool. It says mirrors the selected sketch curves or lines about the selected sketch line. So we're trying to mirror this along this side. So I can choose it from here, or just so you know, in the menu, it is somewhere here and it's right here, mirror. So we can choose this as well. I'm going to click it. A mirror section appears on the right side. Two options to select: the objects we want to mirror and the line we want to mirror across. So this one, if it's blue, that's the one we're going to be choosing. So I want to select actually 4 things. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. So let's try that. I'm going to click on the first one. There it is. And then notice it says 1 selected. I'm going to hold Shift, click on the second one, the third one, and the 4th one. So there are the 4 lines, and that's essentially the rectangle. And there it is, 4 selected items. I'm going to click the Mirror Line selection button. And now it says, who do you want to mirror across? What line do you want to flip across? And that is going to be the dotted line. I'm going to click it. And as soon as I do it, notice there's this kind of light, thin-lined version of our rectangle. I'm going to click OK. And as soon as I do it, now notice we have a mirror, an exact duplicate across that line. And I'm just going to point out, if we count features, 1, 2, 3. This feature, none of those measurements are there because they're hidden behind the scenes. It's implied they're equivalent to this. In fact, the only thing that changed was we see these 4 little symbols, and these are our constraints. They are called symmetry constraints. If I look at the top of my constraint menu, there it is, symmetry. And that's what those are. It's saying, hey, there are 4 symmetries. There's a symmetry of this line and this line. There's a symmetry of the top line and the top line. There's a symmetry of the bottom line and the bottom line, and a symmetry of the left and the left. So there are 4 symmetries. That's why there are 4 symbols. Now, with this, we are done. We only had to make one dimensioning of a rectangle. We had to coincident it. We made a construction line just for help, and then we used the mirror tool to mimic across the other side. So let's finish our sketch. And now we can use our extrude tool to scoop out or cut out those shoulders. So just like before, let's do both of them at the same time. I'm going to pick the first one. It's going to turn blue. I'm going to hold Shift or Control on the keyboard, click the second one, and now I'm going to extrude, so I can go to the extrude button up here, I can go to the menu, or I can hit E. Any of those are acceptable choices. Click it. I'm going to drag forward this way, and notice it turns red, and there it is. So I can cut out that amount. And now here's why I made the mistake last time, and now it's going to make more sense. I could choose some amount to cut out, and as long as it's more than enough to scoop off all of what I want, that's acceptable. But a better choice is for extent in our menu to say all. And it's going to intelligently say, oh, I'm going to go from where I started to as far as I can on a solid object that I'm touching. So it's going to say, you know, only up to this point, because that's all I really want to take away. So if we ever added something in this area, these cuts would not affect it, as opposed to if I dragged it, if I put something right here, this red would eventually cut out of it in the future. So that's dangerous. So instead, all as an extent is the best choice. It's smart. It knows exactly where to stop. I'm going to click OK. And there it is. And I'm going to go to my home button. And here we are. And so I'm going to stop this video now, and we're only missing one portion of our diagram, and that is that final hole or cut into this. And we're almost there, but we'll finish it in the last video, and hopefully you're comfortable with many of these tools. There are a lot of tools, so I understand that it's kind of takes some time to get comfortable, But practice, and eventually you will understand the tools and know when is a good time to use one. There are many ways of doing things. There are many ways of using tools, lots of combinations. It's a matter of comfort, and eventually you will be comfortable with some of these tools and their powers. I'll see you all in the next video.